Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Dream Big podcast. I'm so glad you're with us. Hope it's been a great week. And my favorite part about this podcast is I get to bring friends along, folks that have a loud voice in my life. Mike Thakur is one of those voices. I'm going to let him introduce you to himself. But what I'm hoping that you'll do is that you'll take a couple notes, some things that connect with this, because that might be the beginning of something that maybe God has been doing in your life. And many of the people that listen to this podcast, faith guides their steps. I'm one of them. But other people, faith doesn't. But whatever it is that you want to grow in, whatever area in your life, I hope what you'll find is a couple little nuggets along the way that'll help you get there a little faster. So, Mike, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you're part of this.
I'm glad to be
Let
here.
everybody know who you are and what you're about, because you are like this most fascinating, interesting man in the world.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I'm definitely all about faith and business. And I've been trying to strong arm Bob into give me some wisdom for a little while. So hopefully we're going to get that knocked out today here while we talk through some things. But I wrote a book a little while ago, and you were kind enough to write it forward for me about this concept of trying to take your business and thinking about it maybe differently, and thinking about the idea that what if God didn't give you a business for you? What if he gave you a business for him? And so what does that look like? What does that mean? And obviously with your background, I know you're a lawyer, but still it's a business, right?
Yeah.
And you lived through that journey, and you've gone through probably a lot of stuff that maybe some of us slightly younger entrepreneurs, not a whole lot younger, but things that we're maybe thinking about and wondering. My selfish goal today is to extract that wisdom and see what I can learn from you, and hopefully everybody else can learn some stuff along the way.
And I really like what we share in common is having a foot solidly in the marketplace, and then a foot well entrenched in our faith and humanity, and making a difference in the world, like some small contribution that might make sense. And I've always preferred that. I would self-describe as kind of a man of the cloth without the cloth.
Right.
I don't want people to think I want something from them. I can just go into the marketplace and I can go generate some things.
Right.
And you took that path as well, because you could have said, I'm going to do what some people describe as ministry, but you and I just call that Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So part of it comes with like a new vocabulary to describe what it is that you're doing, but then it depends on a really keen understanding about why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's something I struggled with probably in my earlier years. I grew up in an environment where I think if you had a heart for God, it was very much the understood norm that, well, then you go and do ministry, right? You know, whatever ministry looks like, but that's the ultimate focus. And it took me quite a few years to figure out, actually, I could do ministry with marketplace life. And again, I think that's something that you're right, we've definitely connected on. And I think my wonder is how many folks are out there that have that same heart and just haven't made that realization yet. Or maybe they're struggling in that moment. And I don't know what it was like for you. Obviously you went into law and you had a practice, but where was that epiphany where you woke up one day and said, well, hey, I'm doing this, but actually I could do this as well. Or maybe it wasn't like that for you. Maybe you were smart enough to know it from the very beginning. I don't know.
No, I think for me, the adventure was somewhere in college, realizing that I'm not my dad.
Right.
And you would think that'd be self-evident because we're obviously not the same person. But if you met us, you would really know we're not the same person. We have a different worldview, different values, different things. And he's my next door neighbor. He literally has lived 6 feet away from me for the last 29 years. So we can be close and then have a completely different way that we're doing life and all that. But it's important to realize who it is that you are, that God wants us to be us, like that it actually gives him so much joy as we discover more about how we were wired from the factory to live into that, living a life worthy of the calling we've received. And sometimes when we want to be like other people, then we end up going down a path that looks like their path, but doesn't look like ours.
Right.
So I would say I would just stayed really curious after college. I didn't want to be the guy that just knew that one riff, like to Stairway to Heaven,
Yeah.
on the guitar. But I wanted to actually do something that not everybody knew how to do. And that's when I announced to my parents, I'm going to law school, and I could barely spell cat. Like, they're like, what? Like, one, how are you going to pay for it? And which I didn't know. And two, how are you going to get in? But that tenacity is driven by this desire, a deeper desire not to be typical. How about you? Like, you could have done anything. You could have followed a well-trodden trail, but you said, I'm going to pursue business. I'm going to pursue. I mean, if people that are following you are laughing because you're rebuilding mansions that have been like destroyed in fire. Was it a fire?
It was a fire.
Tennessee?
Yes, sir.
And you bought this gigantic place. You said, I'm just going to rebuild it. Of course.
Also, I think on that one, we've been in Texas for nearly 20 years, and we were just noodling with this idea about what if we tried somewhere new, right? Like, we've lived in America all this time, and this has really been home, but what if home could be different? And so we traveled a couple of times to Nashville, and we had a trip out with the kids, and we saw this house that came up on the market. I don't know if you've seen the stories or not, but if you haven't, we saw this house that came on the market literally the day before we flew, and it just said, burned down mansion, basically nothing salvageable, but you might be able to reuse the patio and the basement, And Linda sends me this text, what do you think? I said, well, we can go take a look at it, right? We're going to be there anyway. So yeah, we bought this thing, and we've been goofing around with it for way too long now. It's been over a year. I thought it'd be about 7 or 8 months. So it's taken a moment. But I think for us, part of the driver was we wrestled with a couple of things. One, from that ministry mindset of, okay, what does the next phase of life look like? What might God be nudging us to do? Where might be the best place to do that? Not that we couldn't necessarily do things from Texas, but for us, we just felt like there was an ask of a step of faith that didn't really make a lot of sense. And even now, I couldn't tell you that it's better off in Nashville versus Texas. My business is still back there. But it just felt like one of those Abraham moments where, hey, if I said, just try something different, would you do it? And I think, especially for folks who maybe have seen a little bit more success in life, or are maybe in a place where, we all still have to work, kind of, but maybe some folks don't have to work quite the same as others. And so I think the asks are different in those situations, because it doesn't take a lot of faith for me to wake up in the morning, and I suspect for you, and say, am I going to have some food to eat today? Some folks are still at a stage in life where they're struggling with paying bills and all that kind of stuff. And I understand that. I've been there too. And so their faith steps might be different. But I think when you get to a slightly different place in life and God's nudging, what I start to wonder sometimes is, do those steps just seem a little bit crazier, a little bit bigger? Like they've got no logic behind them at all, but are we still willing to step out and do something? And so at least for us, that's what we kind of felt like. And so we said, hey, let's do it. And then we've got kids who are teenager-ish, 20, and we were thinking about, okay, if we were going to do something different, what does that look like for them? We couldn't do it in a few more years. But a little bit like the conversation we were having before we started recording, you start to think about what's their life going to look like? Where do we want home to be for them? If we stay here for a little bit longer, it's going to be a lot harder to make this change. And so there's some practical considerations as well. And I think that's the same all through the Bible, right? When you look at people's lives, it's not just about when God says, hey, do this, but I think a lot of times folks wrestle with, but practically that has some implications. You want to go build a school in Uganda, okay, but that means you've got to travel to Uganda probably more than once. There's a whole change of life and pace and everything that comes with that. And you got to think through those things, right?
Yeah. Sometimes it means not being limited by your capabilities as well. So, and what I mean by that, like I was a trial lawyer for many decades. And while I was capable of doing that, as I was growing, as the family was growing, as everybody's interests were changing, I was changing as well. And if I remember, there was this kind of seminal moment where I stepped out on the 17th floor of the Washington Mutual Tower in downtown Seattle, having commuted from San Diego to Seattle and home every day for maybe a quarter of a century, like up and back, up and back, up and back. A lot of time to write books in the back of the plane.
Right.
I walked out of the elevators and the receptionist said, "Who are you here to see?" I said, "Actually, that's my name right behind you." And I realized I hadn't been in my own office in almost a year. Now I was up in Seattle, but I was in court or taking a deposition or doing something else. And I didn't even know the people that work for me. So I got everybody together in the conference room and I quit. I gave the ring that held the keys on it. I gave the key to the office to a guy. I said, "You don't owe me anything. It's all yours." He's like, "Are you kidding me?" He didn't say kitten, but that's what he meant.
Right.
And I've never gone back. I don't even know if it's still there. I couldn't tell you.
So,
I was kind of curious when I go through Seattle here on the way north soon. I'm almost tempted to stop by to see. I wonder if there's. I hope they took my name down, but I haven't checked.
but Bob, how do you do something like that? Because obviously that's a big step, right? Especially to say, just here it is, you don't owe me a thing. So what was going through your mind? Is like if someone else is listening, thinking, "Hey, I feel like maybe I need to make a change, or I'm being nudged to do something." Did you feel like this complete peace that, hey, God was in this? Did this just seem like a practical? This makes the most sense. Like, where were you?
I don't think it's peace that was. I'm familiar with that term. Like I felt peace about this, and so I moved forward. We were like just this young family. Like we weren't sitting on bags of money instead of furniture. We just had like we're just like every other young family. We're trying to figure it out, but there was this sense of resolve that I don't want to just do the typical thing.
Right.
That I think there's another gear there. I think there's more, and I had just written Love Does, and was spending more and more time elsewhere. And I thought that Cortez, the famous story of him burning the ships.
Yeah.
You know, the men, should we leave as the last ship was sinking? What's your next question? So I could have spent 5 or 10 years probably landing that plane instead of having some buy-sell agreement, something that lawyers like me would have written up. But I thought there was a beautiful moment. You just like burn the ships and say, "Okay, here we are." And that was actually this beautiful reset in our family and how we did things. And then many things started changes. And now fast forward to like version 3 or 30 of me, and I'm 65. I've got 3 grandkids. I've a couple people we made, couple people they married. And so I'm trying to bring it a little bit closer to home. So when there's an opportunity, I run it through that filter to say, is this somewhere where I could make a difference? Can I make the needle move? And in my grandkids' lives as well as somebody else's. But just like you, all these opportunities come our way, and then we just need to have a filter to process it. Mine is, am I wanted? There's a great book from a mutual friend of ours, Mike Foster, The 7 Primal Questions. Such a good book. And he would say there's 7 questions that we ask, am I loved? Am I accepted? Am I wanted? Mine is, am I wanted? Can I give you a great example of that?
Absolutely. Come on.
So I say no to quite a few different, there's gatherings, and they'll be nice enough to say, "Hey, will you come speak at this thing?" And I try to measure if that's like more than an hour from the house. I'm like, nah. So there was a gathering in Florida, and they just had a commencement. Well, because of some stuff that was unfolding in New York, the person that was supposed to be their commencement speaker canceled at the last moment because they were the anchor of a news watch, and then there's a big story they needed to cover. So on like a day's notice, they blew out and they called up and said, "Will you come and do this commencement?" Like all the brochures are printed with somebody else's name on it. "Will you come?" Anyway, I'm like, "I'll see you there." Now, for a guy, if they had asked me a year in advance, there's no way I would have done that. But a day in advance, I could see they were in a pickle. And I really like the personal challenge to say, I wonder if I could pull that off. Like, I bet that's how you thought when there's a burned down big building. You go, I wonder if we could pull that off. So what's the role of curiosity? For me, it's a really high value. I'm curious, that the whimsy of like, I bet we could pull this thing off. Is that a big drumbeat in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I've ever thought of it as defined as that. But I think as I look back over the years that we've had, our life has been very non-typical. I think most people still think, you kind of leave college and go to work, and maybe you don't work at one company anymore your whole life, but you probably work in one field or one direction. And we haven't really had that, kind of been all over the place trying to figure out who I want to be when I grow up. So I think that curiosity is a really good way to think of it. It's not that you're always looking for something new, but it's also fun when something new comes along to see, well, what would that look like?
But you're eager, like you don't need to have all the details. So when we've gotten into some capers together, I'm thinking back one from a number of years ago, a school in Gulu, Uganda.
Right.
As soon as sun sets, like that's the last light, unless somebody's got a tiki torch somewhere. And the whole idea was like, what if we light up like 50 or 60 acres on this property? And I think that's about all the information we gave you. And you're like,
Probably.
paper or plastic?
Yeah.
And now it's so interesting. If you come to northern Uganda, it's all dark. It's all like, kind of like this safari land. And then there's one bright light, which is 60 acres lit up with 1,000 lights. What was your thought process? You hear a need, meet a need, yet you're a really sharp business person. How do you make that decision? Because a lot of people are trying to figure out, how do I do some faith stuff and at the same time make smart business decisions? And sometimes on the business decision side, it's very detailed and nuanced.
Right.
And then on the faith thing, you just go with like, I was just feeling it. Like, so walk us through that.
Yeah. So, it's a great question. I think I've got a chapter on it actually in my book, not that I'm plugging the book, but it was something that we've really wrestled with, because there's so many things you could do to help people. And when you've got a heart that wants to help people, you want to try and help everybody, but I don't have enough money to help everybody. So now I got to think, okay, how do I be selective in this? Or, what does it look like for us to get involved in something? And so for Linda and I, probably much like you, I'm guessing, looking at the types of projects you have, Matthew 25 becomes very real. James becomes very real. This talk about orphans and widows and folks who, the way I think of it is folks who can't help themselves. They need a little bit of help. If there's folks who can help themselves, maybe they need to go figure out how to help themselves first. That sounds a little kind of harsh, maybe, black and white, but again, we had to limit it somehow. And so we said, okay, this is the box we're happy to play in. And so we want to find other people that play in a similar box, and then we can find some really cool things to do together with them. Or hopefully as we mature in this process and go a little further down the road, we'll get to actually do some projects ourselves in that same area. And for me, I think as a Christian entrepreneur, as a faith-based entrepreneur, to me, that's kind of the top of the tree. And I know that's kind of where you are, where it's like, we can use the marketplace for kingdom benefit and kingdom advantage instead of using it for Mike's benefit and Mike's advantage. Not that I live a terrible life, but it's not as good as it could be, because we've been happy to say, no, hang on a minute, God comes first. And we think God should do better out of our lives than we do. Whatever that looks like is fluid, but that's kind of the yardstick that we've tried to model on over this maybe last 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? When you and Linda are making decisions about where do we go and how we leave, there's no map for this, because we're like off the map a long time ago. And so as we look around, to be picky about who we use as guides along the way, because this is like we're off-roading, but we have a faith that directs us towards hungry people and thirsty people and sick people, strange people, naked people, people in jail, widows and orphans. So you can have like these waypoints that say that kind of flips that. And oftentimes I found it's just finding one or two trustworthy people. I'm thinking of a guy in Afghanistan that we came across. He's just a good guy, but I had to fly to Kabul to meet him to find out that he was a good guy. And so sometimes that anticipation, and you're also a little puckered up, like, how will this end? And there seemed like there'd be 4 or 5 different alternate endings. But I just love that anticipation to not lead a comfortable life, but to lead a meaningful one, one that really matters, that will move the needle. And so find other men and women that are thinking the same way. When we go through the interview process to add somebody to our team with the things that I'm doing, oftentimes we'll get from a big batch of people down to about like 10. And then of those 10, somewhere in the conversation, I'll mention that I've been looking for a 2-pound eggplant. I can't find it anywhere. It's crazy, driving me nuts. Then we'll get back to whatever we were talking about. And out of 10 people, there'll be one person that goes to Trader Joe's that brings over an eggplant. And if we put it on the scale, if it weighs 2 pounds, they're hired. Because people who are listening for what you want, you don't need to tell them what to do.
Right.
So that idea to find people that are eager, they're Philippians 2:20, like taking a genuine interest in other people's welfare.
Yeah.
So if you're listening, if you've got your head on a swivel, you're looking for the opportunities, find some trustworthy people that aren't trying to make a headline about themselves, but they're just trying to say, this could actually move a needle. And people that want a bunch of applause, they need to join the circus.
Right.
People that want to make a big difference, man, I want to join with me. Let me join them. I don't care if it's your thing or my thing or our thing or
Right.
whatever, just whatever gets that done.
What have you found challenging though? Because obviously in business, hiring is a tough thing, right? Finding great people is probably in the top 3 of every entrepreneur's whatever list.
Yeah.
And so for you, that's a little bit more nuanced because, hey, we want to go build a school in Uganda. Well, someone's got to be in Uganda and oversee this thing while we get going. What was that like? Like, as you've picked all these tough places in the world to go to, what does it look like to find those people?
Part of it is kind of like cultivating this farm league team, which are these undiscovered major league players. And so all the people that are in my orbit are these just undiscovered. It's like if I could have their rookie card, that you could retire on that. And in some ways, if you could just get your head moving to find here and there, to find that person that's untapped, you go like, oh, this is a fast pony.
Right.
If you went to the fair as a kid, there's one of the arcade games, you squirt a squirt gun, it has a stream of water and the ponies start going from left to right across. So finding those fast ponies, I don't know why they get all the water in the hole. They just tend to get the water in the hole and their ponies out in front.
Yeah.
So maybe instead of being wrapped up in the 3 underperforming people are the ones that need, like, I have a lawnmower I need to kick a couple times before it'll get started, but not surround yourself with people that you need to continually feel like you're hopping around on your left leg because your right leg's in their keisters. Like, let's get something done. But find people that are like, hold my earrings. Like, I've been just trying to play catch up with the people that are around me. So I would say that to find those quality people and then be clear about why you're doing what you're doing.
Right.
And so I bet when I was 20, I wanted to be popular or famous or something. If I could have melted people's face with a Stratocaster, I probably would have signed up for that. But now I just want to leave a legacy. I want to say, is there a way to, because we have some opportunities, to turn that into a longer term benefit so that people who will never know my name or know the names of the people that are making things happen, that they would benefit from that. Right. So talk to us about that. So as an entrepreneur, you want to find things that work. And so now what we want to do is say, will it last?
Wow. That's good.
Tell us about that. How do you work through that matrix yourself?
So I think for now, I'm in the world of flexible office space with a business in Houston. And I think when we started that, we had this idea of, okay, if we're going to start a business, that's one thing. But then if we could start a business and maybe connect it to a nonprofit right from the get-go, well, that's a different thing now, because it's not just a business, it's a business with something else on top. And so we kind of took that approach there, really just clueless to see, could you even do this? I didn't know anybody else that was doing it the way that we were. It just seemed like an idea that we wanted to kind of push on. And so we did. And I think over the years, it's through that we were able to play with things like lights and paving and, that kind of stuff in Uganda. And so it's been really fun for us to kind of watch that grow. But I think from the business perspective, whether the business lasts or doesn't last, I think the story will always be there of the things that do last that came out of it beyond the core business itself. Some might call that the peripheral type things, but whatever you want to call it, I think those are things that will last in the conversation and maybe be more interesting in the conversation than, how big was your office and how nice did it look, even though they are pretty nice, that kind of thing.
I have this idea of things that are adjacent to us. And so I think of this idea of adjacency constantly. What are the opportunities that are adjacent? What are the possibilities that are adjacent? When people roll onto the campus, they don't notice that they're rolling on these amazing, cobblestone roads.
Right.
But they get this vibe of excellence.
Yeah.
But there needs to be somebody that has that vision that says, let's do this excellent. Because you could
Right.
cobble together a couple buildings, get a beaker, call it a science lab,
Right.
or you could do best in the nation.
Yeah.
And best in the nation means to have, from the landscaping to the lighting to the whatever, to create an environment where people will thrive. And you don't need to go across an ocean. You can go across the street.
Right.
How can you do best in the nation in Houston or Nashville or
Right.
San Diego? Or how can you do, we've got a little retreat center. How do we make people feel special there? So taking your desire to serve and then this entrepreneurial flair, and to say, what might be possible? I remember we spent a ton of time up in Canada. And have you been on a seaplane before? Those
No,
beaver seaplanes?
No.
Oh, they take off and land on the water. They're awesome. They're so old. You can tell when a beaver's out of oil because it stops leaking. It's just all old hydraulics and everything. Well, I love just the sound and all that. I thought, I'm a lawyer. I could start an airline.
Right.
And because I live so far in the bush, I said, we process all the paper. The last thing you need is an airplane. It's like, darn it. But the thing about beavers, they're always hitting stuff. So I got the wings off of one crashed one and the fuselage off another. And listen, we put this thing together, painted it like a Krispy Kreme donut box, and said, okay, now we got an airline. The reason I mentioned that, well, we lost money every time we started the propeller.
Right.
This commute I did from San Diego to Seattle, I code-shared with American and Alaska Airlines, so they could fly on my plane if I could fly on theirs. And so for all these years, I flew for, I think I just paid taxes like $4 each way, and I could eat my body weight in peanuts. And so the whole idea to say, is it viable? And is there a whimsy factor to it?
Yeah.
And it's not just being on this hedonistic bender about collecting stuff, but to say, is it possible that we could turn this idea, this relationship, into a school if we found one or two capable, qualified teachers, if we gave them the safety net to say, go do what you do well,
Right.
And then do that excellently, instead of having people stay in Gulu and hop on a bus and go out and visit the school. What if we built the guest house in the campus? What if we surround the campus with a 10-foot tall and 3-foot thick wall, because every insurgency starts in the north and sweeps to the south? What if we protect the kids in advance? We don't want to be Nehemiah building the wall in the middle of the insurgency. What if we build it before the next one? And so that idea of thinking ahead, to that point, how do you organize your life? Do you go out like 1 year, 3 or 5 years, 1 minute, 3 minutes, or 5 minutes? Like, how do you let's take a peek into what it feels like to be Mike. How do you organize? You have hopes and desires, some big long-term things, kind of edge of the horizon, and then you have the immediate things. What are we going to do with this or that?
Yeah, I think, as a younger guy, I probably bought into this idea of having longer term plans makes a lot of sense. Whether it's 5 years, whether it's 10 years or whatever. Not that I would necessarily write down a 50-year plan or something, but in your mind you're thinking, because you hear all these other people talk about it. As I've gone a little older, and none of those things that I thought would happen in 3 or 5 years really happened in 3 or 5 years. So now I've dialed it back to say, okay, well, the next month or two looks like this, and maybe the next year or two, I'm hoping I can do this. But beyond that, I've started to stop thinking that far ahead, partly just because our journey has just been such a roller coaster. And I don't know if that's partly our doing or whether it's partly God's doing or whatever, but it doesn't feel like our path is a very linear path. And again, different people are different, but for us, I just stopped wanting to give that kind of energy to some future point where in reality, the last 25 years says, whatever I think 3 years are going to look like is not going to look like. So then why bother? I can focus on a little bit of a tighter spot and say, well, if this happens, or if I can do this, this could go here, but beyond could, I'm happy just to leave that for now. And let's just really nail this bit that's close to me and see if we can do that really well. I think you talked about at one of the events I was with you, you've got about 30-ish or so different things that you'll work on, and you kind of keep it, within a budget. or something like that. Talk about that.
Yeah. So what I think of isn't as much timeline driven is ambitions. Like, what are the ambitions? Some people that I know that are lawyers want to start a war uh, with everybody. And I wouldn't it be neat ambition to end one?
Right.
So say, like, well, how do you end a war? Well, you got to go find a war to end a war, right? You can't just read about it and say, like, do a Jedi move and say, everybody be happy, have some cake pops and get along. But instead, find a country. And so if you pick Somalia, so you say, okay, Somalia there, and then what's the problem? And very nuanced and spanning decades, but there's 12 warring clans. And they don't get along and it's all shot up. So they got away with did away with the government, did away with their currency. So it's Mogadishu's a problem area.
Right.
So what if you just buy a ticket into Mogadishu and get off the plane? And so I know that sounds like nuts. But what if you just must be present to win? So I remember walking into this hotel and I didn't blend in very well. I remember a guy came over to me and he said, so, what are you here to do? And I said, well, I just wanted to come and see if we could do something for kids and all that. And I asked him, what do you do? And he said, oh, I'm in charge of Somalia's Navy. And I was thinking a second, like, they don't have a Navy. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's in charge of the pirates.
Right.
So that idea, if you ever want to unmeet somebody, that would be like who I want to unmeet. But that idea of showing up and then just saying, you throw your hat over the wall and to say, I'm going to go see what happens next. And it isn't that there's no plan at all, but you have an underlying ambition that you'd say, I'd like to participate in seeing peace return to a region that I know nothing about. It's not a white savior complex. It's just like a humanity thing. The Minister of Defense for the country is a really nice guy. He was somebody I found out about. And so I invited him to meet me at a particular time at a particular hotel. I also called one of the sultans that's in charge of one of the warring tribes, clans, and I told them to meet me at a certain time at a certain hotel. It was the same time, same place for both guys.
Right.
I brought slingshots and saltwater taffy, and they arrived. And these guys are like people technically at war with each other, but it was just three guys shooting saltwater taffy at cans. And there was something beautiful about just doing something together, like having a shared experience. Think of the Acts Church, Acts 2 and 4. They broke bread together. Yeah. They pounded the carbs and they had things in common. And so tell us about that, boy, how you, like, I want to be the guy that has a string of ambitions and then where there's an opportunity crosses with an ambition. I'm like, I'm in. Instead of saying, no, that needs to wait for year 3.
Right.
Just say like, no, if that's minute 3, then awesome. I have an ambition into war. And what's the next move? I don't know, get some saltwater taffy, a couple slingshots, and extend a couple invitations. I remember flying to Beijing to meet the leader of the underground church in China. Wouldn't that just be so interesting? Madame Tingley, I think was her name. And so we set the time and the date, and I got to Tiananmen Square with Sweet Maria and the kids, and I thought this is going to be terrific. And she no-showed. That's the end of the story. There's no awesome ending. So sometimes you show up and you go, well, that didn't turn out the way I was hoping. And forget again, going across the ocean, go across the street.
Right.
Don't go to the ends of the earth. Go to the end of your street. I just sort of think of the neighbors that are around you. What's one practical thing I can do to express love and a commitment and connection to them? Bake them a pie. Wash their beat up car. Don't wash their fancy one because you'll scratch it, but find their worst car. A neighbor of ours named Pat was on the side of my house. I heard all this rustling around. I'm thinking raccoons. And I thought, wait, we're in San Diego. There's no raccoons. And I find Pat is pulling my garbage out on Monday morning to the corner. I'm like, oh, Pat, like, no, buddy, I'm fine. I got this handled. And as we're wrestling around the garbage cans, I get out to the street with him, look all the way to the left and right. He's taking out everybody's garbage. And then he flies off to wherever he is to work for the day, flies home, and he puts everybody's garbage cans away. That guy loves his neighbors.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's one of the things. When I listen to your podcast, you talk about that a lot, and it's great how you bring it back to where individuals are and day-to-day life. But if I can dial back to, let's take the school in Uganda for a second. So I've seen a picture of the original school. Doesn't look anything like the school today. Little shack with a banner on it that was kind of hanging, relatively straight, maybe a little bit off. So then, if you've got this ambition of, hey, we want to go build a school, I'm going to assume that was something along those lines was the ambition. So you started off with this one little building. What did you think that process was going to look like? Did you really start thinking, man, we're going to get 1,500 students in this thing, and it's going to become this huge campus on all these acres? Or was it really just, we're going to get a shack, and if it's only ever a shack, man, I still nailed it, I'm great?
You'll see the picture, the aerial of this school with dorms and buildings and physics labs and chemistry, all that. And you think that that's the starting chip,
Right.
Where the war was still going on. We told 400,000 young people who are out of school that had no opportunity for school, you can come to our school for free, and 9 showed up. Now that would be a bust by any measure, but I thought, man, with 1 or 2 more, we could have a soccer team.
Right.
And there was a neighborhood pig that used to run through the field, and we rented a school campus for $400. I don't know if it was a month or a year. It wasn't much.
Right.
And from there, then we grew from 9 to 19 and 29, 39. So proving the concept.
Right.
When we moved to the new campus, we bought 60 acres and said, let's go build something. We started with one building, not all the buildings.
Right.
And that one building was made out of bamboo because but we bought a machine in South Africa, had it brought up that could make these proper interlocking bricks. And then we built 58 buildings with that machine. And it's pretty worn out. But that idea to just say, what would be next? So I would say, and answer your question, you do the next thing, the next courageous step. Like, what would be the next thing if there's an opportunity and ambition? And it isn't about bigger and better. Sometimes things are supposed to stay 9,
Right.
and other things are supposed to. The current vision is to go from diapers to doctorate.
Right.
And so Jody Luke, who runs Love Does now, has all this acreage she's purchased and building plans, and we've got a university that's underway. And this would be a little bit of the whimsy factor. I was trying to think, wouldn't it be great if these village kids that will never be on a safari would be able to see some of these animals? And I was thinking, what's an animal that doesn't bite people and is hard to lose? I thought giraffes.
Yeah.
So I think she's got aiming to get a square mile, and then we'll put giraffes in there and see what happens next. Now, I've just told you everything I know about giraffes, like long neck. We need a chiropractor. But to say, is there something, and maybe there'll be somebody that runs hotels, we could say, what if you set up the hotel on our land, and then we'll do hospitality training for our kids that don't want to go onto university and parliament. So to make all these avenues for success. And I just think entrepreneurs in the marketplace oftentimes think that way.
Yeah.
What might be possible? What might be possible? And then not just make it brain candy, but to actually bring some business acumen to it.
Yeah.
What we have done at the early stages of Love Does, I was a lawyer and we had a donor.
Right.
So you do what you can, but then we had ambitions that were bigger, and then all these people started jumping on, kind of like a Greek wedding. You grab the shoulders of the person in front of you and say, "Opa!" So I think that's it. To have a beautiful long-range look at the horizon. What could happen if we took a kid from a hut in Uganda and we put them in the presidency in Uganda? Like that idea has just resonated with me. And then not try to control it, but influence it. Does that make sense? Tell us about that in your practice of in the business world. I don't try to control things, but I do want to heavily influence them. Control feels like shame and bony fingers pointed and like this kind of ominous, overbearing thing. But influence is I'd like to exert some influence.
Yeah, well, I think that goes back to the conversation we had about around people and around how you find the right people. It's that approach of who you've got in your orbit, as you said, and what they're willing to do, where they're able to dream as well, so that they've got a little bit, not necessarily buy-in's the right word, but they're on the same kind of track with you versus thinking this is never going to happen, this can't happen, this is too big, this is whatever. I suspect that's going to be a negative pull rather than a positive pull of the train, down the tracks towards the station. But with the school, again, just staying focused on Uganda for a second, you commented there, you had one donor, which was probably you, I'm going to assume. Now that's a little bit different, but, going back to those early days again, how did you think about that? Or how did you think, well, I can do this or I can't do this? Was it challenging? Was it scary? I think in our world today, especially for faith folks, and especially for successful faith folks, there's a lot of conversation around, hey, you can give to this, you can give to this, you can support this, whether it's your church or ministry, whatever. And there's not a lot of conversation around, hey, you could just go do something yourself.
Yeah.
Why don't you take what you've got and go play with it, go have some fun? So what was that like for you, maybe emotionally and also just practically as a family?
I think it's the power of camaraderie comes to mind, to have a band of men and women that you're moving in this direction together, and there's no big head person, but you're just moving together towards this. Yet, it's not that everybody wants to be in charge. I ask this question, who's responsible?
Right.
And at the end of the day, I am responsible for Love Does.
Yeah.
And so finding somebody that will take on the responsibility in a beautiful way. My first thing I did being responsible, get Jody.
Right. Right.
Get somebody who's better than me.
Jody's awesome. If you don't know Jody, she's awesome.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So find that person, in Oz, behind the curtain, the wood full and all the things. That's Jody. And so find somebody who has that track record that's measured in decades, not minutes or weeks.
Right.
And then once you've got your posse, to say, kind of like if you go into a hotel, there's a concierge. If you say to the concierge, I'm hungry, then they might say, well, do you want a burger? Or do you want a fine cuisine? Like, do you want Italian? And so as you start seeing yourself more as the concierge behind the desk, so that as people come to say, hey, I'm feeling this stirring to be helpful in some ways, you could say, hey, what pulls your hair back? Like, if there's a nudge, how could we be helpful? Like, what is it that we could do? And then you could say, here are the things we have going. Does any of that light you up? Or can we help you launch your thing? Right. Because if we can be helpful, whatever it is that makes things happen, it sounds like a really good idea to me. Yet the things that we do, it isn't just like, well, everybody do whatever they want to do.
Right.
There needs to be some influence that you create to say, we don't do this kind of thing. And there can be a host of reasons. But the most important of which is that we don't do those things. So we just don't do that. And so I don't want to get caught up in every social issue of the day. And we're known for our opinions. We're remembered for our love.
Right.
And so I don't want to be the passing opinion, like, what's your position on this? And what's your position? It's not that I don't have a very orthodox, button down, people would say, well-starched view of faith and all that. And yet, I have a bigger ambition to love everybody. Like, what is it that gets us further down the road? And so not getting tripped up in some of the small nuances, that is a benefit of being like not a church, because you're an entrepreneur. Like, nobody's in my knickers about what you're, my statement of faith is just one word. It's just Jesus. And that's the long explanation. And it isn't being cocky. It's just like, that's the only part that matters to me about that. And there's a lot more beneath that. And so personally, I know where I'm at on all those things. Yet somehow we've managed to navigate to not be distracted or get off message with some other things that are the biggest and most important thing to somebody else, but it's not the biggest and most important thing to me.
Right.
And so I would say that would be another heartbeat within a nonprofit world, to remember why you're doing what you're doing, and to say you can have, a very refined orthodox doctrine, but I want to have a beautiful theology.
Yeah.
And I found some people that have great doctrine and lousy theology.
Yeah.
And loving people the way Jesus did is great doctrine and great theology.
Yeah.
So I'd just say, like, to instead of getting wrapped around with the distractions, to say, hey, what's the big heartbeat here? We do schools in conflict countries and help kids. We want to turn them into presidents. And so if a Kenyan kid shows up at our school in Uganda, it's not being mean to say, no, I want to make Ugandan presidents, but we're making Ugandan presidents here. And so if you're clear, but you're not beating people up with that, you're just very clear. Like, oh, yeah, this is what we do. And if you can't afford it, you can do something. What'll that be?
Right.
Like, well, what is it? What contribution can you make? You want to help us with agriculture, or do you want to do something else? If your only contribution is that you can play soccer well, which is great. I'm all for it. I'm not much of a sports guy, but I know that like creates a lot of team spirit. Like, what else can you do? Because if it's just fancy footwork, that ain't gonna be enough. Because that's going to be popular now. But I want to do things that are lasting, like edge of the earth stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
So the school, obviously in Uganda, a lot of its success, I think, in the early years, from what I've read, comes from the book Love Does. I think you tell a story about when you were working out your deal with the publishers there, and you wanted some of the royalties to go and benefit the school in Uganda, if I'm telling that story.
Yes. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So you can find something. It's just like, if I made cupcakes, people would die. But if it's a typo, it'd be like, actually, you have to know how to spell it in the first place for it to be a typo. But so you think, just like have an airline code share,
right?
Like, and you don't make any money on this one, but you make bank on not paying for tickets. Right. But if you say, I could do a book, I could assign the royalties to this outfit, and then they could do some great things, then we'll find somebody capable of the task, not the little puny contribution I would make, but like bigger contributions to make bigger differences. And then you cultivate that kind of excellence. I think that's it. But to have a plan, to your point, to have a plan and to say, what if we, and I'd say one thing that's planned is to be super available. Right. To say, I just want to be really available. That's in the back of every book is my cell phone number.
Yep.
I get a fair number of calls. But you don't have to swing at every pitch. Somebody might be a little on edge about one thing or another. Be like, I don't know, man, like, blessings on you. I'm just taking, I'm sitting on the back porch with Sweet Maria, but like, good luck on the journey, and other people, like end of life conversations that you have, like that idea of availability. It's been so interesting. And you're, I guess, 18 since the book came out, to think of all the people that we've had a chance to say hi to along the way. So I would say that's another thing for people that are interested in making a big difference in the world. Just be the most available person, unless you're like Sweet Maria, and that isn't the high value. She don't want to be available to everybody.
Right.
It's me, the people we made, the people they married, and the people they made. That's her circle of availability. My circle of availability is like Earth until we find life on another planet, and then the circle is going to get bigger.
But Love Does wasn't your first book, though, right?
Oh, I did. I wrote another one called Finding Karishma. It was awful.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't. I bet Karishma feels bad about it too. But I think it was intended. It was well intentioned. I just didn't have anybody to tell me how to do it properly.
Right.
And so that's among the things that I just take so much joy. If somebody calls up and they say, tell me how to write a book, I'm like, okay, get your pen out. Here's 90 seconds. Here's to do this. Write 90 stories, 90 release stories. Use one, me, my, or I, and everything else has to be we, us, and our. And I would say if somebody said in 90 seconds, tell me how to run a nonprofit, have one, me, my, or I, one thing that gets you there, but then everything else is about we, us, and our. I think that great idea too. You've met people, haven't you, that would say like, well, enough about me, let's talk about me. How do you find people that have been really successful in navigating business and faith at the same time? What are some characteristics you've seen in them?
I think first of all, for me, it's been hard to find a lot of people that are visibly successful in faith and business, and then willing to want to talk about that or share about that on a personal level. So you can find books here and there where people have spelled some of their life story out. I've found podcasts where somebody's spent some time talking about things and little glimpses come on. But I think there's not enough information, or I've struggled to find a lot of really in-depth conversation around, hey, this is really what the nitty-gritty look like, running a business, but trying to do it God's way, trying to make decisions, against a biblical framework. I'm in the co-working business, right? So we have, I don't know, about 100 or so offices in each location. We have a couple of locations. So it's not a huge business, but we've got more than a few small businesses to mid-sized businesses that come into work every day and work out of our spaces. And we're in Houston, Texas. So a lot of those folks they'll have their signs on the wall about, scripture and Jesus this and whatever else. And most of my staff are not believers. It ebbs and flows, but at the moment, I think one out of the entire team is. And so for me, as a guy who's trying to do the right thing, not that we get it right every time, but as we've tried to build a business, we've tried to model it on biblical principles that maybe don't look overtly biblical, but they still are. And that's where the heart comes from. You talk about excellence, things like the passion that you bring, the genuineness, transparency, those kind of things. And what I've noticed, and this is just anecdotally across 2 co-working locations, I'm not saying that the whole of America is like this, I'm not saying the whole of the world's like this, but what I've noticed is a lot of the folks who are entrepreneurs or business owners in the smaller scale, they will talk about having faith, but there is no direct correlation between how they do business and the faith that they talk about. And I find that particularly painful when we've had conversations internally with the team and somebody will say, well, oh, look, that's one of those Christians, and it's in a negative sense. And I find that really heartbreaking, personally. I'm not sure how Jesus sees all that. I'm sure he's got a different perspective to me, but I think it's a weak area that we could really do better at. As a church, as a body of believers, just as a group that say we love Jesus, I think we could all do to figure out how to do better at how do I translate this faith that I talk about, not just to my personal life, but to this business that I'm stewarding and to this entrepreneurial lifestyle that I'm supposedly chasing, whether it's how I treat people, whether it's how I treat my staff, whether it's the things that I do, whether it's how much I want to bend the rules, and think that I'm getting away with things because no one's watching, all those kind of things. I just think there's a disconnect there. And you may have seen differently. It's one of the reasons why I came to you first, the first retreat I came to with you, I guess 3 or 4 years ago, because I was looking for people that do it differently, because I just couldn't find enough of them. And that was a real frustration point for me.
I found 2 things are true in entrepreneurs. One is that idea of a childlike faith, and you definitely got that. Like you got a sparkle in your eye, like some mischief. I don't know if it'll misdemeanor or felony, but you got some mischief just behind the curtain. So childlike faith and like relentless curiosity to say, I wonder, they're not afraid of failing. They're afraid of not trying. And I've done some things that have failed like colossally, but I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. I just try to do less of that.
Right.
This time it's all a very heat. I can't give all the details of it, but I bought a house across from the street from the Supreme Court to have people from all the different places that are trying to get along have a place they could meet. And we didn't put a name on it like a Chris Tomlin.
Right.
It was just this house. And we fixed it up and people came for years. It was like used constantly by all kinds of, not like groups, just like people. It would be a safe place from these different branches of our government. And then they changed whatever rules there were or something. And so now it's empty. And so I go to sell, but it's in the middle of this economic downturn.
Awesome.
And I just lost so much money, but I sold it to a guy who then turned it over to another guy who is like worst possible outcome. And that's existing today. There'll be a trial coming up, evidently, where many of these things, it's the Death Star. And it was meant to be this place of just camaraderie and all that. So if that place becomes available again, I'm going to go burn sage or burn it down or something. But I mentioned that because sometimes there can be a false positive in that you hear from entrepreneurs about all the things that work, and then the school here, and then the one there, and then I invented water, and then, but to say, I want to give like equal time to the things that didn't work, yet I've noticed a continuity in thought between successful people in business and faith is that they don't spend a lot of time crying over the pretzels. They just say, yeah, like some stuff ain't gonna work out. It'll go colossally wrong. But that doesn't define you. It informs you. Just say, well, that could happen. Now what's next? And let's get back at it. Let's go back to building that rocket ship. So you get wrapped around the axle to say, was this an open door or a closed door? Man, just shoot it off the hinges.
Right.
You guys in Texas do that all the time. So, but to just say, what I'm going to do is follow love's lead. And then I want to touch on one last thing, this idea of comparison. Sometimes that can gut our entrepreneurial or our desire to express our faith into the world, is that we're comparing what we're doing with what somebody else is doing. And I'm just always reminded that God never compares what he creates. He just creates. So how have you kind of brushed aside comparison so you aren't watching what the other person's doing, but you're kind of keeping your eye on your own paper?
Yeah, I think as a kid growing up, I was probably oblivious to comparison. Good, bad, or indifferent, it just wasn't something that was on my radar. I think then, when I became an adult and started to work professionally, well, I used to be a sales manager. So sales is all comparison because it's all numbers. It's all how you perform against every other team in the business, and reward and recognition comes with that. So that kind of flipped the switch the complete opposite way. And I think that took me a long time, and probably is something I still wrestle with to some extent, to try and get away from now. Even though we sell obviously as a business, it's not that same as a very high pressure sales kind of environment. But I think the challenge that I've faced, and things I've wrestled with, is really more comparison against the version of Mike I thought I would be at this point in life versus the version of Mike I actually managed to become. And that may go back to some of this long range kind of planning versus not long range planning. And I guess different people are different, but I suspect some folks probably wrestle with that. Not that life doesn't work out the way you wanted, but you think, man, if I put all my energy into this business and I work on this for 5 years, I'm going to be here. And so then here equates to other things, whether it's in my family life, in my personal life, in my, mental, emotional growth and all these other kind of things. But then if this bit didn't work out, well, then did all of this other stuff come along with it? So I think for me, it's more been that type of comparison I've wrestled with versus comparing to just other people, although that is inevitably still there. I'm going to be like Bob when I grow up.
You want to aim way high. Otherwise you'll end up, with all this white whiskers and all that. We had the America's Cup here a number of years ago in San Diego, and there's a beautiful edge to comparison. And what you do is there's a goal out there, the buoy, that's windward, and you want to get there the fastest. And so you see what the other boat is doing. And when the wind has changed a little bit and they're being drawn on their tack more towards that buoy, that's called being lifted. And if the wind changes a little bit in the opposite direction and they're being drawn a little bit away from the mark, that's being called being knocked. And so to see the other boats around you and whether they're being lifted or knocked. And so I want to so the way to fix it, if you're getting knocked, is change directions, like tack the boat.
Right.
And then what's a knock on one track is a lift on the other track.
Right.
So that idea, that's why you see the sailboats do that zigzag pattern, lifts and knocks, lifts and knocks, lifts and knocks. I heard a guy that started a big company online. I was talking to him about what made him successful and how does he choose between the things he does. And he said he feels like a Roomba vacuum cleaner. And I'm like, I was just such a beautiful word picture. I'm like, what do you mean? He says, a Roomba, it hits a wall and then it pivots and it tries not to hit that same wall.
Right.
But it maps as it's going along. It hits a chair. It just tries to not hit that chair. Doesn't mean it's not going to hit another wall, but each time he learns, each time lifts and knocks, lifts and knocks. And I would say to ask God to give us the wisdom, which he said, if we were humble, he would give it to us, to just see where the lifts and the knocks are, see where the next wise move might be. And then when it all goes awry, not the way you were hoping, then to say, okay, so let's retool with that new information. Where do I go from here? Tim, Mike, thank you so much. Thank you so much for making the time to do this, to grab a little bit of time, talk about some leadership principles. I'm going to give you the last word. What do you want to see people do as they're moving forward with their next courageous step?
I think my heart would be just to see people feel comfortable enough that God's with them, and if they've got an idea to try something, to just go try it, whatever that is, however small, however big. Try not to overthink, try not to overprocess, and try not to overcompare. Right? Well, 5 other people tried it and it didn't work, so why would I do that same thing? If you're feeling something inside, I think that faith walk, just going back to that concept, is scary for a lot of folks, and if we all knew the end from the beginning, it wouldn't be faith, right? So inevitably, a little bit of scariness is okay. So if you feel like God's in it, man, just go for it.
Yeah, there's a great definition of faith in Hebrews 11:1. It says it's confidence in what we're hoping for and assurance in what we haven't seen yet.
Yeah.
And that gives me a lot of encouragement. I just go okay, what am I hoping for? And I want to just say that I'm hoping everybody will be happy, but to say well, let me drill down on that, to say, I bet we could put some kids in chairs. We could get a collection of friends and we could all be in it together, get lots of kids to scale in a lot of chairs. And then to see what would happen, we might fill a couple chairs in Parliament. We might fill 1 chair in a presidency someday. So to have that thing you haven't seen yet, but have that expectation, that say I bet that'll happen. I wouldn't be surprised. And the whole idea in scripture was that so that we would see how good God is. Not how swell we are, but that he lets us experience all these things so people would see his goodness. Well, thank you.
Thank
hey,
you.
How can people get a hold of you, Mike? If they, I know you're not promoting your book, but what's the name of the book?
It's called Mic Drop.
Yeah, Mike Drop, appropriately named.
Yeah.
With a foreword by your friend,
With a foreword by
Bob. And how can they reach you if they want to find out more? I know I've been following on Instagram for the longest time.
You can find my website, MikeThakur.com. That'll point you to anywhere else you want to go.
Yeah. So you guys, you've been listening to the Dream Big podcast. Hope this has been helpful for you as you're figuring out your next courageous steps. And don't just agree. That is what I want to nod my head and say, oh yeah, Mike's right about that. But to actually take a note and to say, okay, this is how I'm going to activate that today. This is the one thing I'm going to do. All right. We'll talk to you next week.